Alright, hello everyone, welcome back to our regularly scheduled classes and our regularly scheduled lessons. So this begins our next unit. So for today we're going to look at revolutions excuse me, in Latin American countries. So our objectives and standards are to recognize the effects the French Revolution had on revolutions in other countries and analyze the role and leadership of key figures in revolutionary movements. And if you would, please take a moment to look over the standards there as well. So our desired result for today is, how did Latin American countries gain independence? So let's begin by looking at Latin American society. The society in colonial Latin America was dominated by class. At the top we have the Peninsulars. These were the people who were born in Spain. They were kind of like aristocrats, as you see there, and they were the only ones who were in charge of the highest positions in government. Following that, we have those who were Spanish-born in the New World. They were known as Creoles, and they could rise to positions of power in the military, but not so much the government. Both of these groups, both the Peninsulars and the Creoles, are going to control power, wealth, and land in the Spanish colonies. Now, following that, we have mestizos. These were people of Caucasian and Native American mixture of descent. They were next in line. Following that, we have the mulattoes, who were part of Caucasian and African descent. And then following that, we have the African slaves and the Native Americans. I've seen it both ways, where these Native Americans were at the bottom, slaves were above them. So I'm not quite sure what the order is. I've seen it both ways, but for our purpose, we'll look at it this way. But this was the basic class structure of Latin American society. In the late 1700s, Latin American countries were beginning to feel the effects of both the Age of Enlightenment and the French Revolution. So let's talk about the Haitian Revolution first. Saint-Domingue, which is present-day Haiti, which is in the Caribbean islands, was a French colony, and it is the first to declare itself an independent nation from European control. Okay, what happened is that the plantations on Saint-Domingue were worked by many African Americans. In 1791, kind of learning about, again, the Age of Enlightenment, the French Revolution, slaves are going to rise up against the plantation owners, their brutal owners. And there's going to be a man who emerges here, and his name is Toussaint Louverture. And that's his picture right here, drawing an arrow for you on the left-hand side there. Now, he was not a military leader. You can see here he's a military, uniform and outfit, but he was a former slave. And he's going to lead this rebellion. And by 1801, he is going to control the island and free all the slaves. Now, you might think that's the end of it. In 1802, however, we talked about this in our last unit, about Napoleon sending troops back over to the islands to try and reinstate slavery. This is what happened. French troops arrived on the island to stop the revolution. Toussaint agreed to end the revolution if France would abolish slavery. Now, even though an agreement was reached, Toussaint was later arrested and thrown in jail, and he will die there in 1803. Now, the person who took over after him is this gentleman right here, Jean-Jacques d'Estaing. He was the lieutenant under Toussaint. He took control of the fight and finally declared the country independent in 1804. And like we said, with Napoleon, the French troops are going to be forced to leave, and the island will be renamed Haiti as we know it today. So this is kind of the start excuse me, of the Latin American kind of revolutionary movement in terms of those countries gaining independence. Now, following this, Creoles are going to become leaders. Many Creoles were wealthy and educated. Some had even traveled to Europe and learned of Enlightenment ideas. Now, when Napoleon decides to install a French king instead of a Spanish king over these colonies, many Creoles are going to be upset with this. They wouldn't have minded a Spanish king, perhaps, but they did not like the idea of having a French king. By 1810, many Latin American countries began rebelling and began looking for independence. So let's talk about Venezuela's fight. Simon Bolivar was a wealthy Creole who led the revolutionary movement in Venezuela. In 1811, Bolivar declared the country independent from Spain. Now, Spain, of course, not really taking too well to this. They decided to send troops over to Venezuela. Bolivar and his volunteer army are going to be unsuccessful at fighting the Spanish at first. They're going to have a lot of unsuccessful battles and unsuccessful attempts at their independence movement. But in 1819, Bolivar and his troops are going to catch the Spanish off guard and win a very decisive battle. Following that battle, the tide will kind of turn against the Spanish, and eventually in 1821, Venezuela will become an independent country. Here's a picture of Bolivar here. Argentina helps out. Now, Argentina had declared its independence in 1816. However, Spanish forces in Chile and Peru were also a threat. Now, José de San Martin, he's going to remove the remaining Spanish forces out of Peru. And he's also going to work with Simon Bolivar, who we just talked about, to defeat the Spanish and helped free Latin American countries from their rule. So Bolivar and him going to get together to try and force the Spanish forces out of Peru and Chile. So again, Chile and Peru will be able to help out and gain some independence for those countries as well. Here's his picture as well, or painting him, I guess you should say. Mexico calls for independence. In 1810, a priest named Padre Miguel Hidalgo issued a call for rebellion against the Spanish based on Enlightenment ideas, freedom, freedom of speech, those types of things, liberty. Now, he led a group of 80,000 men in a march to Mexico City. Now, many wealthy citizens and Spanish soldiers are fearful of this group of men who are coming to Mexico City. Unfortunately, Hidalgo is eventually defeated, but he kind of sparks this desire for revolution. Through the next few years, many different leaders, are going to take control of the revolutionary movement. In 1820, however, the Spanish government kind of changed, and there's some new rules put in place and a new government system and things like that. And the people in Mexico fear that they may lose some power. Okay? Those in Mexico then decide to unite together to demand independence from Spain. After some fighting and things like that, Mexico will become an independent country in 1821. Other countries will also eventually declare their independence from Mexico, because Mexico was actually the whole country of Central America, and other countries will eventually kind of break off from Mexico to form their own part of Central America. Brazil. Brazil had been under the rule of Portugal, not Spain. We talked about that during the Age of Exploration, that Brazil had been founded by Portugal for sugarcane and things like that. Now, the royal family is going to flee Portugal for Brazil when Napoleon invaded Portugal. They're going to rule from Brazil for 14 years until Napoleon is finally exiled. But their son, Don Pedro, stayed behind to rule. Well, Brazil is not really happy about this. When Portugal tries to make Brazil a colony again, the people actually protested and signed a petition for independence. Don Pedro actually agrees, and Brazil will finally become an independent country in 1822 as well. And then finally here we have a picture of Dom Pedro. Again, he was the leader of Brazil for a little bit, and agrees to free Brazil to become its own independent country as well. Alright, so please try your best on the questions that follow. Let me know if you have any concerns or comments, and I'll hopefully see and talk to you guys soon.